There was a time when the most dangerous place in the toy world was not a factory floor or a theme park ride, but a quiet conference room in Billund, Denmark. It was 2003. Outside, kids were happily snapping colorful bricks together. Inside, a handful of executives were staring at spreadsheets that looked like a slow-motion car crash. The numbers were brutal. Lego was bleeding money at a rate of roughly $1 million every single day. Cash reserves were running so low that insiders whispered about how many months of life the company had left. Not years, months. For a business that had once felt immortal, it was like watching a beloved family member hooked up to failing machines. This was Lego, the company that started as a tiny Danish workshop, cutting simple wooden toys for local children, then reinvented itself with the plastic brick that locked into place with a satisfying click. Not only did it become the world's most beloved toy brand, it turned into a cultural icon that shaped childhoods across generations, built miniature cities on bedroom floors, and quietly trained millions of young minds in creativity and problem-solving. Yet in that room in Billund, the myth was colliding with the math. Sales were falling. Debts were rising. Warehouses were full of products no one really needed. The empire of play that once seemed untouchable was now flirting with the same kind of collapse usually reserved for over-leveraged banks, not smiling toy companies. Here is the paradox. Out in living rooms and classrooms, children were still building spaceships, castles, and impossible machines out of bricks. The magic at the level of play was alive. But inside the company, costs were exploding. The number of unique pieces had nearly doubled in a few years. Factories were struggling with complexity, and wave after wave of experiments, from over-designed sets to sprawling theme parks, were swallowing money faster than it could be earned. Lego had chased video games, action figures, clothing lines, even its own media franchises. On paper, it looked like ambition. In practice, it was distraction. The more the company tried to be everything at once, the more it forgot the disciplined system behind the humble brick that made all that creativity possible in the first place. It's an example of what happens when a business built on imagination loses its grip on reality. A company whose life mission was creativity and play nearly destroyed itself through the ruthless pursuit of novelty, the seduction of constant growth, and a quiet arrogance that assumed the brand was too loved to fail. At times inspiring and at times chilling, this story is not just about a turnaround, but about identity, discipline, and power. So let me take you back to the day the brick almost died and follow the brutal decisions, the near-bankruptcy fire sale, and the radical rethinking that finally pulled Lego back from the edge, and what any creator, executive, or empire of one can learn from its brush with death. Lego's brush with death is not just another corporate scare story. It has become a full case study in boardrooms and MBA seminars from Copenhagen to California. Not only did the world's most famous toy company almost run out of money, it did so while sitting on one of the most beloved brands on earth. That contradiction is what makes this episode so disturbing and so useful. There was a time when Lego looked unbreakable. The brick felt eternal. The logo felt safe. Parents trusted it. Children worshipped it. Yet by 2003, this same company was reportedly losing around $1 million every single day, drowning in debt, bleeding cash through theme parks, video games, clothing lines, and experimental products that tried to be everything except a simple system of bricks. It's an example of what happens when a company confuses motion with progress and novelty with value. From a distance, Lego's near collapse is at times inspiring and at times chilling. Inspiring, because the company eventually rediscovered its soul, cut away the noise, and rebuilt itself into the most powerful toy brand on the planet. Chilling, because it proves that affection is not armor. Even a childhood favorite can drift so far from its purpose that it almost vanishes. Brand love did not pay the interest on Lego's loans. Underneath the financial charts and strategy memos sits a more human question. What happens when a company forgets why people fell in love with it in the first place? When the quiet joy of building gives way to executives chasing media deals, licensing frenzies, and ever flashier plastic that no longer fits the old system. And once that bond is broken, can a business ever truly find its way back to the kind of trust it enjoyed before the fall? So let me take you back to the beginning of this arc, from a small Danish workshop cutting wooden toys, to the invention of the interlocking brick, to a post-war golden age where the system of play made Lego feel less like a product and more like a language. Then into the chaos of the 1990s, when diversification became a religion, the number of unique pieces nearly doubled, costs exploded, and the empire of the brick turned into a maze of incompatible parts and unfocused bets. This story will follow Lego down into the early 2000s abyss, through the cash-raising fire sale of Legoland Parks, the arrival of a young consultant-turned-CEO named Jürgen Vig Knudstorp, and the ruthless, data-driven discipline that followed, killing pet projects, shrinking the catalog, and returning power to the core brick and timeless play patterns. For anyone watching, this is not just about toys. Whether running a startup, managing a team, or remembering late nights on the floor with a pile of plastic pieces, Lego's near collapse is a blueprint. How to survive disruption without panicking. How to resist ego-driven decisions that feel exciting but hollow. And how to protect the small, quiet thing at the center of your work that actually matters. Because once that center is lost, even legends can fall. The question is, who notices in time? There was a time when that small, quiet thing wasn't a global brand, or a cinematic universe, or a theme park. It was just a man in a drafty workshop, in a town most people would never visit. Let me take you back to the early 1930s, to Billund, Denmark. A village so small, the train didn't even bother to stop unless someone waved it down. In the middle of the Great Depression, when money was evaporating everywhere, a carpenter named Ole Kirk Christiansen was watching his own life contract plank by plank. Building contracts dried up, clients disappeared, and the half-finished projects around town turned into wooden monuments to poverty. Ole had a family to feed, apprentices to pay, and a workshop full of tools that suddenly had no purpose. Because construction orders collapsed, he began doing whatever he could to keep the doors open, repairing furniture, making ironing boards, building ladders. Then, almost as a last resort, he tried something that looked trivial compared to houses and barns. He started making toys. At first, it was simple wooden ducks, pull-along animals, little cars with wheels that wobbled across the floor. The kind of thing that, on paper, should not save anyone from bankruptcy. Yet this was where his story is one of quiet defiance. While other craftsmen cut corners to survive, Ole went the opposite way. He adopted a motto that sounded almost ridiculous for a man on the edge of collapse. Only the best is good enough. That line was not marketing. Workers told stories of Ole walking through the workshop, picking up a batch of toys, spotting a crooked paint line or a rough edge, and ordering the entire lot destroyed. Perfectly sellable in a desperate town, gone in an instant. When an apprentice tried to argue that customers would never notice, Ole's answer was blunt. The children would notice. Quality was not about what parents could afford. It was about the standards he refused to lower. This ruthless devotion to craftsmanship shaped everything. He redesigned the wooden duck so its beak opened and closed when pulled, adding moving parts that were harder to make and easier to break. He experimented with standard sizes, repeatable shapes, interchangeable wheels. Long before a plastic brick existed, he was quietly drifting toward a system of play rather than random toys thrown together. And hidden inside that cold workshop was the seed of both Lego's future empire and its future crisis. Because when a company is raised on the belief that more detail, more features, more perfection is always the answer, it can create timeless magic. It can also create runaway complexity. It's an example of what happens when the same value becomes both shield and sword. Ole's obsession would finally lift Lego out of the dust of Billund. Decades later, that very obsession would push his descendants terrifyingly close to the edge again. Ole's obsession was about to meet its most controversial test. To fulfill this dream of precision, he would have to abandon the very material that had defined his life and his family's craft. There was a time when wood meant quality. Wood meant tradition, dignity, real toys. Plastic, by contrast, looked cheap, smelled strange, and felt like an insult to generations of carpenters. Yet in the late 1940s, as Europe crawled out of the ruins of war, a new material was rising. It was light, moldable, and, crucially, it could be made the same way every single time. For a man obsessed with control, plastic was dangerous and irresistible. So Ole did something that, in Billund, looked almost reckless. He spent precious money on bulky plastic injection molding machines, hauling in industrial monsters to a village workshop that still remembered horse-drawn carts. Fellow craftsmen shook their heads. Why trade honest wood for this glossy impostor? Because plastic could do one thing wood never could. It could interlock with microscopic accuracy. At first, the results were modest. Plastic rattles, plastic cars, small toys that felt more like experiments than an empire. But then came a strange little idea from across the North Sea. A British company called Kiddicraft had developed small hollow bricks with studs on top. Lego acquired the rights to the design for Denmark and began tinkering. The early bricks looked promising, yet frustrating. They stacked, then slid apart. Towers toppled. Children discovered gravity more than creativity. Let me take you back to the moment that changed everything. Lego's designers added tubes underneath the bricks, creating a hidden internal geometry that gripped the studs with just enough force. Not too loose, not too tight. Suddenly, there was clutch power, a satisfying resistance when bricks locked, and a small victory each time they came apart. This was no longer a toy that happened to be plastic. It was a precise engineering system disguised as play. From that breakthrough emerged a radical philosophy, the system of play. Bricks from one box could connect to bricks from another box, from another year, from another theme. A house could become a spaceship, then a bridge, then something no adult had a name for. Instead of one-and-done toys, Lego was quietly selling a reusable creative engine. His story is one of turning inert plastic into a living language. Psychologically, that changed childhood. Children weren't just following instructions, they were learning to think in systems, to break objects down into units and rebuild them into new forms. A child who built a simple car was also learning symmetry, balance, even basic structural engineering, long before anyone used those words. Lego was not only selling toys, it was selling a way to organize imagination, a grammar of color and geometry that could be spoken for a lifetime. And that system would grow. Across decades, across themes, across generations of the same family, passing down boxes of bricks like heirlooms. At times inspiring and at times chilling, It's an example of what happens when a design principle becomes more powerful than any single product. Because years later, when Lego chased spectacle, characters, and quick money, forgetting this quiet system, that same power would turn on them. The brick that had taught children to build would almost help dismantle the company that created it. There was a time when a small Danish brick didn't just win the toy aisle, it ruled childhood itself. Not only was Lego the default birthday present, it was the quiet center of an entire generation's play, humming away on living room carpets while the rest of the toy industry chased noise, batteries, and spectacle. Let me take you back to the 1960s, when Lego made a decision that would define its empire. Instead of chasing random novelties, the company doubled down on a single, disciplined idea: a standardized system of interlocking bricks, tubes underneath, studs on top, precise tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. That engineering obsession meant a brick from 1963 would still click perfectly with a brick from 1983 or 2023. Parents saw plastic. Lego was quietly building a language of play. Through the 1970s, that language expanded. Town sets turned kitchen tables into miniature cities, gas stations, fire trucks, tiny houses with red roofs and white walls. Castle arrived with gray walls, hinged gates, and knights on horseback, giving children a medieval world to defend or destroy. Then came space: blue and gray ships, translucent yellow windscreens, radar dishes pointing at invisible galaxies. Each theme felt like its own universe, yet every piece could migrate between them. A castle turret could become a rocket engine. A space wing could be a drawbridge. The system always came first. In 1978, Lego added its most famous word to that language: the minifigure. 2 dots for eyes, a simple smile, and a body made of the same geometry as the bricks. It could sit on a stud, grip a bar, drive a car, or fly a spaceship. Because it was so plain, children could project anything onto it: hero, villain, family member, even a stand-in for themselves. While rival toys tried to win with more muscles, louder sounds, and bigger weapons, Lego leaned into abstraction and quiet power. That restraint was not an accident. During this golden age, Lego's philosophy was ruthless in its discipline. Limit the number of unique elements. Design sets to be broken down and rebuilt, not displayed once and forgotten. Focus on timeless, non-licensed themes that could be sold year after year, immune to the rise and fall of TV shows. Because of that discipline, parents came to trust the brand. Lego meant learning, creativity, and long-focused afternoons of trial and error, a rare product that felt like play to children and education to adults. His story is one of a company that, for decades, understood its own power. At times inspiring and at times chilling, it's an example of what happens when a system becomes so strong it feels untouchable. And that's the tension, because just as Lego reached this height, the world changed. Screens entered the playroom, video games swallowed attention, and a new generation of leaders inside Lego began to wonder whether bricks alone were enough. The moment they started to chase the very fads they once outlasted, the golden age began to crack. There was a time when the biggest threat to Lego was a cheaper brick from a rival factory. That era ended the moment a gray box from Japan walked into the playroom and stole the children. Let me take you back to the late 1980s and early 1990s. Nintendo, then Sega, then Sony with the PlayStation, turned living rooms into digital arcades. Bright pixels, instant rewards, endless levels. For the first time in the company's life, Lego wasn't just competing with other toys. It was competing with an entirely different universe of entertainment that lived behind a screen and never had to be picked up off the floor. Inside Billund, the mood shifted from quiet confidence to a low, constant hum of anxiety. Internal reports began landing on executive desks, warning that children were spending fewer hours on traditional construction sets and more on video games and television. Attention spans were shortening, patience for slow, open-ended play was fading, and the old promise of "you build the world" suddenly had to compete with "press start to enter one." The brick, once the most flexible object in the room, now looked strangely silent next to a console that talked back. Retailers noticed it first, because retailers always notice when money moves. Shelf space started flowing toward character toys, licensed heroes, and anything tied to the latest movie or game launch. Analysts followed, writing notes that treated Lego as charming but outdated, a relic of a slower era in a world racing toward digital, cinematic, always-on experiences. To them, the empire of the brick looked frozen in time, while the rest of childhood accelerated. Because of that external pressure, something more dangerous than competition began to grow. Doubt. Not doubt in management spreadsheets, but doubt in the brick itself. Instead of doubling down on its core strengths, tactile creativity, quiet focus, the strange power of a simple system, parts of Lego's leadership started to believe that the future belonged to louder, faster, more exciting products. If screens were stealing attention, then toys had to act more like screens. So conversations inside the company shifted. Less about systems, more about stories. Less about timeless play, more about chasing the next big character, the next technology, the next way to bolt electronics and narrative onto plastic. It's an example of what happens when a company that once outlasted every fad begins to fear that the only way to survive is to become a fad itself. At times inspiring and at times chilling, this was the moment when Lego's leaders finally asked a question that would haunt the next decade. What if the brick is the problem? Their answer would not be cautious. It would unleash a wave of experimentation so aggressive, so unfocused, that the company nearly erased its own identity. And the first sign of how far they were willing to go was about to hit the shelves. That wave didn't start as chaos. It started as confidence. In the 1990s, Lego's leaders convinced themselves that innovation meant one thing: more. More categories, more experiments, more ways to escape the limits of the humble brick. If the old formula had built a toy empire, then surely 1,000 new formulas would buy even more power. There was a time when that sounded rational. The family company faced new enemies: video games, cable TV, a generation raised on instant stimulation instead of quiet afternoons on the floor. So leadership drew a simple conclusion. To compete with digital worlds, Lego had to become a world, not just a toy. It's an example of what happens when fear of being left behind turns into an obsession with being everywhere at once. Let me take you back to the product meetings of that era. The question on the table was no longer, how do we deepen the brick system? But what else can Lego be? The answers came fast. Clothing lines with minifigures on the tags, watches with tiny studs on the straps, educational software that promised learning through play on a glowing screen, video games that turned plastic pirates and racers into pixels, and looming in the background, the early idea of entire theme parks built from the brand's image. Each move had its own logic. A t-shirt kept Lego on a child's chest, a watch on their wrist, a CD-ROM on the family computer. Money flowed into prototypes, licenses, new teams, But under all that motion, something critical went missing. A single, disciplined spine that tied it all back to the core system of play. The empire was expanding without a map. Inside the design studios, the same mindset took hold. Designers were no longer just asked to create within the brick. They were encouraged to reinvent Lego itself. New themes demanded new, highly specialized elements. Dragon wings molded in one perfect curve. Spaceship cockpits that only fit one model. Giant hull pieces that completed a ship in seconds. On the shelf, these sets looked spectacular. At home, once the model was built and broken, those exotic parts sat there, impressive but awkward, hard to reuse in any other story. Because of this restless experimentation, the product portfolio began to swell. Between the mid-1990s and the late decade, the number of unique elements nearly doubled. New colors, new molds, tiny variations that required new machines, new storage, new quality checks. Every extra shape added cost and complexity, while quietly eroding the elegant simplicity that had once turned a small box of bricks into unlimited worlds. Now, pattern interrupt. Picture two boxes side by side. On one side, a plain tub of classic bricks, simple shapes, primary colors, no fancy artwork. On the other, a hyper-specialized 1990s set with a cinematic logo, custom pieces, and a model that looks perfect only in one configuration. Which one actually delivers more long-term play value? The answer had built Lego's early wealth. Yet in chasing innovation as spectacle, the company temporarily forgot that the most powerful toy in its history was still the most ordinary-looking one. That amnesia would show up brutally on the balance sheet, and the bill for all this creativity was about to come due. That bill didn't just show up as a bad quarter, it showed up as plastic. Mountains of it. In Lego language, every one of those mountains had a name, an element. Not a set, not a theme, but each unique brick shape, each color variation, each tiny printed tile. A 2x4 brick in red was one element, the same brick in blue was another, and a 2x4 with a Star Wars logo printed on top was a third. Every element demanded its own steel mold, its own inventory slot, its own line on a production schedule that was already starting to look less like a toy plan and more like the blueprint for a small industrial empire. There was a time when this system was lean. Through the 1970s and 80s, a relatively small library of elements powered castles, spaceships, towns, and entire childhoods. Designers were forced to be clever with what already existed, and that constraint quietly protected the company from chaos. Then, in the mid-1990s, the guardrails came off. Designers chasing ever more cinematic models, ever more specific shapes, began inventing new elements for almost every visual effect. A special wing here, a custom dragon head there, a one-off cockpit that fit exactly one new ship and nothing else. Between 1994 and 1998, the number of unique elements nearly doubled. Not sales, not profits, elements. The catalog ballooned with exotic colors, hyper-specific slopes, and printed pieces that only made sense inside a single short-lived theme. On the shelf, it looked like abundance. Behind the scenes, it was a slow, methodical loss of control, because every new element carried a hidden price tag. Steel molds cost serious money to machine and maintain. Forecasting demand for thousands of tiny variations turned planning into guesswork. Warehouses had to hold not just boxes of sets, but bins of elements that might or might not ever be needed again. When a theme retired, all those custom dragon tails and neon windshields didn't magically vanish. They sat, tying up cash, filling racks, turning from assets into silent reminders of overconfidence. As long as sales were climbing, the company could pretend this complexity was harmless, even glamorous. But when growth slowed in the late 1990s and competitors from video games to action figures started eating into attention, the cost base didn't shrink. It was locked in by that swollen parts library. Every misforecast meant either empty shelves and angry retailers or pallets of unsold plastic that would never justify the mold that created it. It's an example of what happens when creativity runs ahead of discipline, at times inspiring and at times chilling. By the early 2000s, Lego wasn't just making too many parts. It was building an entire business model on the assumption that more elements, more themes, more everything would naturally mean more money and more power. That assumption was about to collide with reality, and the company was about to discover just how ruthless the numbers could be when the plastic stopped paying for itself. Those numbers did not just look bad on a spreadsheet. They were about to drag Lego into a different business entirely. There was a time when the answer inside the company seemed obvious. If the brick alone was not delivering enough growth, then the brand itself had to do more. Not only toys, an empire. So Lego took a page from the largest entertainment giants on Earth and decided the plastic brick should come with roller coasters, hotel rooms, and a full vacation attached. Let me take you back to the 1990s, when the first Legoland theme parks began to look like the future. These were not side projects. They were full-blown resorts with water rides, miniature cities, restaurants, parking lots, and year-round staffing. Concrete, steel, and landscaping replaced injection-molded plastic as the main cost drivers. Overnight, a tight, high-margin toy business was welded to a capital-intensive, weather-dependent attraction model that lived or died on tourism cycles. Inside Lego, the logic felt irresistible. If children loved the sets, surely they would drag the whole family to a park. If the parks worked, then TV shows, video games, clothing, watches, backpacks, even home decor could orbit around them. The dream was a 360-degree universe, a Disney-style life built out of bricks, where every birthday, every holiday, every weekend trip passed through the Lego brand and quietly printed money. But this is where the story turns, at times inspiring and at times chilling. Because parks, media studios, and lifestyle products did not behave like boxes on a toy shelf. They demanded huge upfront investment, long payback periods, complex regulations, real estate bets, food operations, safety inspections, and a level of operational expertise Lego simply did not yet have. Management attention, already stretched by too many toy themes, now had to worry about hotel occupancy rates and ride throughput. The margins told a different story from the glossy concept art. Compared to the core brick system, the parks were low-return, volatile assets. Media projects, from video games to direct-to-DVD movies, soaked up cash and talent, then vanished from shelves in a season. Some made money, many did not, and almost none reinforced the disciplined system thinking that had once defined the product. Instead of asking how every new venture deepened the connection between product, play, and promise, Lego increasingly treated its name as a logo to be stamped on anything vaguely family-friendly. A watch with studs on the band, a sweater with a minifigure, a theme park ride that looked impressive in marketing shots, but did nothing to explain why a simple brick could unlock imagination. It is an example of what happens when a company falls in love with its brand power and forgets the humble engine that created that power in the first place. Pattern interrupt for a moment. Imagine an alternate Lego that never built a single park, never chased lifestyle branding, never tried to be Disney with sharper corners. Would that quieter, more focused company have nearly died? Or would it have stayed modestly profitable, selling bricks while the world chased flashier dreams? The answer to that question sits at the heart of what happened next, when the bills for all those dreams finally came due. Those bills did not arrive gently. They crashed through Lego's tidy Danish calm in 1998, the year the company did something it had never done in its entire life. It lost money. There was a time when the Lego Group seemed almost immune to gravity. Decades of steady growth, a near-mythic reputation for quality, a family name that carried moral weight as well as commercial power. Losses were things that happened to other toy makers, to the chaotic, the careless, the short-term gamblers. Not to the house that built the brick. But the numbers disagreed. In 1998, sales stagnated in markets that had once felt automatic. In the United States, the world's richest toy arena, Lego sets sat on shelves while children drifted toward PlayStation and Nintendo. In Europe, longtime retail partners quietly cut orders. The top line stopped climbing. The bottom line fell through the floor. Costs, meanwhile, were marching in the opposite direction. Between the mid-1990s and the end of the decade, the number of different Lego elements nearly doubled. New colors, new molds, strange one-off pieces that only appeared in a single experimental set. Each one required design time, tooling, inventory, quality checks, packaging changes. One more brick on a mountain of complexity that no one fully understood. And then there were the dreams that had looked glamorous on slides and turned ruthless on the balance sheet. Legoland parks that devoured capital and delivered thin returns. Clothing lines and lifestyle ventures that consumed attention but never built a real empire. It was an example of what happens when a disciplined system company starts behaving like a sprawling entertainment conglomerate, chasing brand magic instead of hard numbers. Inside Billund, the emotional impact was far deeper than a red figure on a report. This was a family-owned, values-driven business that had survived war, fires, and global recessions without posting a loss. Admitting failure felt almost existential. For employees who had grown up with the story of the founder carving wooden ducks in his workshop, the 1998 loss did not just question strategy, it questioned identity. Were they still the careful stewards of a timeless toy, or had they become just another company that flew too close to its own mythology? And the worst part? 1998 was not the bottom. The next few years tightened the vice. Products multiplied, but clarity did not. By 2003, the company was reportedly losing around $1 million every single day. Cash reserves shrank. Banks asked harder questions. Quietly, people in the finance department ran scenarios where the money simply ran out. Let me take you back to those meetings for a moment, because in one of those rooms sat a young, relatively unknown internal strategist named Jürgen Vig Knudstorp. While others debated themes, licenses, and the next big bet, he was assembling something far less glamorous, a cold diagnosis of what had gone wrong. His story is one of spreadsheets, hard conversations, and a decision that would finally decide whether Lego's proud history ended here, or whether the brick still had one more life left in it. There was a time when Lego's leaders were convinced they were witnessing the end of their own empire. Screens were everywhere, attention spans were shrinking, and the fear inside headquarters was simple and terrifying. Who would ever choose quiet plastic bricks over exploding pixels and 3D dragons? So instead of asking what made Lego powerful in the first place, they tried to outrun the PlayStation. Sets became louder, faster, more cinematic. Designers were pushed to create instant spectacle, not slow-burn creativity. Why wait for a child to build a spaceship when the box could already contain a pre-shaped starfighter, a full cast of characters, and a backstory that read like a movie script? Let me take you back to those late 1990s product meetings. The internal mantra spreading through the company was that kids are bored by basic bricks. Executives pointed to video games, action figures, collectible cards. Construction was seen as old-fashioned homework. Narrative and novelty were the future. That belief justified everything. Ultra-specialized pieces that only worked in one model. Story-heavy themes where you barely had to build. Even non-construction toys that had more in common with generic action figures than with the Lego system. On paper, it looked creative. In reality, it was at times inspiring and at times chilling. Because every new curve, wing, and creature part exploded the number of unique elements the factories had to produce. Between 1994 and 1998, the parts catalog nearly doubled. Warehouses filled with molds that were beautiful, expensive, and almost impossible to reuse. The company was chasing excitement while quietly eroding the elegant simplicity that had once made its wealth. Inside the walls, decision-making drifted. For decades, Lego had been disciplined, almost austere. Now, success was measured in buzz. Teams greenlit themes on gut feel, on the thrill of a cool prototype, on the assumption that anything with that bright logo and enough novelty would sell. Market tests were skipped. Cost analyses were fuzzy. It's an example of what happens when a beloved brand starts believing its own legend more than its numbers. Structurally, the machine was breaking down. Design teams, marketing, and manufacturing operated in silos, each chasing their own heroic launch. No one had a clear, shared view of which lines were actually profitable, which themes built long-term loyalty, and which were quietly bleeding money. A set could be a media darling and still destroy margin. Another could be a humble bestseller and remain nearly invisible inside the spreadsheets. And into that fog walked a former McKinsey consultant in his early 30s. Jürgen Vig Knudstorp, armed not with toy designs but with pivot tables, uncomfortable questions, and a willingness to touch Lego's sacred cows. His story is one of methodical diagnosis, ruthless clarity, and a decision that would finally force Lego to choose. Keep chasing spectacle, or bet everything on the brick. What he found when he opened the books would stun the company and trigger the most controversial cuts in Lego's history. What he found behind those pivot tables did more than stun the leadership. It forced them to confront a quiet, unsettling possibility. The only person in the building who truly understood how close Lego was to collapse was a 34-year-old former academic with no toy design portfolio and no family name. Let me take you back to the man behind those spreadsheets. Jürgen Vig Knudstorp was not a classic toy executive. He had trained in economics, taught at a university, then moved into consulting, where life was measured in models, cash flows, and probabilities rather than minifig smiles. When he joined Lego in the early 2000s, he walked into a proud empire of play and did something almost rude. He asked where the money went. There was a time when that question would have been brushed aside with a warm story about creativity, children, and the magic of the brick. But Jürgen kept pressing. He mapped product lines, traced costs, and followed themes from concept sketch to retail shelf. Colleagues started to notice that this quiet, analytical Dane with wire rim glasses could explain more about why a set lost money than most people could say about how it was built. Inside Billund, he occupied a strange position. He was not part of the Christiansen family that had founded Lego, did not carry the emotional weight of the name, yet he treated the company's heritage with almost religious care. That outsider-insider status gave him a rare power. He could look at sacred lines like Bionicle or sprawling experiments like theme parks and video games and say, calmly, that they were draining cash. But he also understood that for the family, these were not just assets. They were pieces of their life. Officially, his job was analysis. Diagnose the problem, produce a report, hand it to the real decision makers. Unofficially, his report read like a controlled detonation. Lego was losing around $1 million a day. Complexity had exploded. The number of unique elements had nearly doubled in just a few years, turning factories into chaos and supply chains into guesswork. Because of that lack of discipline, the company had built a beautiful, unsustainable machine. His conclusion was ruthless in its simplicity. Lego did not suffer from too little imagination. It suffered from too little control. The company had forgotten that it was running a system, not just selling toys, and every new color, mold, and side venture pushed that system closer to failure. It was at times inspiring and at times chilling to hear someone say that the road back to wealth would require fewer choices for designers, fewer pet projects for executives, and fewer emotional attachments for the family. And then came the twist. After dropping this bombshell, the young analyst was not shown the door. He was handed the keys. In 2004, Jürgen was made CEO and told, in polite Danish corporate language, to do what his own numbers demanded. Fix it, or watch Lego die. What happened next is an example of what happens when discipline is treated as aggressively as creativity, and the cuts that followed would shake Lego to its core. So when Jürgen walked into the corner office, he didn't start with a vision board. He started with an autopsy. Not only was Lego losing close to $1 million a day, the company didn't even fully understand where the blood was coming from. The new CEO ordered a strategic review that went far beyond tidy PowerPoints. Teams were sent into factories to trace the journey of a single brick, into warehouses to count pallets of forgotten elements, into toy stores and living rooms to watch what children and parents actually did with Lego sets once the box was opened. There was a time when the company assumed it knew this by heart. Now it had to watch in silence as reality played back the footage. On paper, Lego looked like a creative empire. Thousands of different elements, wild new shapes, specialized pieces for every tiny detail. In practice, the review showed something at times inspiring and at times chilling. When every product line was put through a cold profitability lens, the numbers were ruthless. A shocking share of sets were losing money once design time, molds, logistics, and discounts were counted. The more exotic the parts, the worse the economics. Deep in the supply chain, auditors found bloated inventories of obscure elements that appeared in only 1 or 2 sets, then never again. Shelves held pastel dinosaur tails, custom spaceship fins, oddly angled castle arches. They looked great in concept art. They were terrible for cash flow. Each new mold meant huge upfront money, complex planning, slower factories. It was an example of what happens when creativity runs ahead of discipline for just a little too long. Then came the twist. The most profitable products in the entire portfolio were not the flashy experiments. They were the simplest, brick-heavy sets. Basic boxes of primary colored bricks, classic city sets with reusable parts. The old system in play that Lego had been quietly drifting away from was, financially, carrying the weight of the company's ambitions. When Jürgen took these findings to the Kirk Christiansen family and senior leadership, the mood in the room changed. This was a family that thought in decades, that saw Lego as a life's work and a responsibility, not just a business. Now the charts on the wall were saying, in polite graphs and brutal percentages, that their beloved company was structurally unsustainable. He challenged the core assumption that innovation meant more pieces, more themes, more complexity. Innovation, he argued, had to mean profitable play, fewer elements, tighter ranges, sets that children actually built, rebuilt, and wore down, instead of fragile sculptures that parents regretted buying. The emotional tension was real. Admitting the truth meant admitting that years of strategy, signed off by the family, had led Lego toward the edge of collapse. Legacy was colliding with arithmetic. Values were colliding with survival. Finally, the review forced a question no one in Billund had ever seriously faced. If the family wanted Lego to live, were they willing to hand real power to someone outside the bloodline? The next decision would break with tradition, rewrite the company's life story, and put a non-family member in charge in the darkest hour Lego had ever seen. There was a time when the most powerful toy company in Europe was days from running out of money. Banks were circling, losses were mounting, and inside the Lego headquarters in Billund, one decision would decide whether the family's lifework became a legend of survival or a case study in how empires die. In 2004, they chose a man almost no one outside Denmark had heard of. Jørgen Vig Knudstorp, mid-30s, former McKinsey consultant, an internal strategy guy who loved data more than drama. And for the first time in the company's history, the CEO's last name was not Christiansen. That single break with tradition signaled how desperate the moment really was. Let me take you back to the numbers Jørgen walked into. Lego had just posted some of the worst results in its life. The company was reportedly hemorrhaging close to $1 million a day. Cash was dwindling. The banks had written covenants into Lego's loans, and the company was getting dangerously close to breaking them. If that happened, lenders could demand their money back immediately. In the background, quiet conversations started. If the turnaround failed, Lego might need to be sold, carved up, or even see its brand auctioned off piece by piece. His story is one of calm in a room that felt like it was on fire. Colleagues remember that he did not shout, did not slam doors. He asked questions. He built models. He mapped where the money actually came from and where it vanished. But that calm exterior hid a ruthless clarity. Survival came first. Nostalgia, second. Jørgen's immediate priorities were brutally simple. Stop the bleeding, simplify the machine, and protect the brand from panic. That meant stabilizing cash flow, even if it hurt. Production had sprawled across too many locations, with too many unique elements driving costs through the roof. He pushed for fewer parts, more efficient factories, and a supply chain that behaved less like an artist's studio and more like a disciplined industrial system. Here's the pattern interrupt. When most people imagine saving a creative company, they picture a visionary unveiling wild new products, blockbuster sets, some dazzling innovation sprint. Jørgen did the opposite. His first big moves were about cutting, selling, and saying no. No to unprofitable theme parks, which led to selling a majority stake in Legoland to raise cash. No to beloved but bleeding product lines. No to endless new piece designs that made designers happy and accountants terrified. Because of that discipline, hundreds of jobs were cut, projects were killed, assets were sold. At times inspiring and at times chilling, it was a masterclass in how far a leader will go to keep a brand alive. Yet he refused the easy, short-term tricks. No racing to cheapen the brick. No reckless licensing that would dilute Lego's identity. It's an example of what happens when a company decides that long-term trust is worth more than one more desperate quarter. The clock was still ticking. The banks were still watching. But with the bleeding slowed and the empire slimmed down, Jørgen was finally ready to ask a different question. If Lego survived, what exactly should it be? So when Jørgen asked, "What should Lego be?" the answer that came back was brutal. Whatever it was, it could no longer be a theme park operator. There was a time when owning entire parks filled with towering brick castles and life-size dragons seemed like the ultimate expression of Lego's power. Legoland Billund in Denmark, Legoland Windsor in the UK, then parks in California and Germany. They were monuments to the brand, physical proof that this tiny Danish toy had become an empire. Families loved them. Kids begged to go. On the surface, it looked like success made solid. Underneath, the numbers told a colder story. By 2003, Lego was losing around $1 million a day, and the parks were capital-hungry beasts. Massive upfront construction costs, constant maintenance, seasonal swings, complex safety regulations. Every new ride meant more money sunk into concrete and steel instead of plastic bricks. The toy business was gasping for air, while cash sat locked in roller coasters. So let me take you back to the decision that shocked even longtime insiders. Around 2003-2004, the Christiansen family and the new leadership team agreed to sell a majority stake in the Legoland parks to Merlin Entertainments. Overnight, Lego went from proud owner to minority partner. The deal raised much-needed cash, slashed risk, and shifted responsibility for expansion to a company that actually specialized in running attractions. On a spreadsheet, it was elegant. In real life, it was at times inspiring and at times chilling. Employees who had poured years into building the parks watched control pass to outsiders. For the founding family, those parks weren't just assets. They were childhood memories, a public stage where Lego's story played out in miniature cities and pirate coves. Letting them go felt like tearing out a piece of the company's life. Yet that pain was the point. Because of how close Lego was to collapse, sentiment could no longer outrank survival. The sale signaled a new philosophy. Lego would not chase every glamorous extension of the brand. No matter how visible, no matter how beloved, if a business didn't reinforce the core brick system and generate sustainable returns, it was on the table. And the scalpel did not stop at the gates of Legoland. Alongside the sale came layoffs, factory closures, and consolidations from high-cost plants to more efficient sites. Hundreds of jobs disappeared. Product lines were put through a ruthless review. Slow sellers and overly complex themes vanished. Experimental gadgets and digital hybrids were quietly buried. It's an example of what happens when a company discovers that discipline, not dreams, will decide whether it lives or dies. Selling the parks solved the immediate cash crisis, but it also raised a harder question. If Lego was no longer in love with every shiny extension, what about the bricks themselves? Because the real trouble, as the data would show next, was hiding inside the very system that made Lego famous. The data told a brutal story. Lego didn't just have too many themes or too many parks, it had too many pieces. Inside the factories, the legendary system of the brick had swollen into a chaotic empire of plastic. There was a time when a Lego set might use a few dozen basic elements. By the late 1990s, that had exploded into thousands of unique parts, colors, and decorations. New wings for one spaceship, a special cow for one farm, a custom sword that appeared in exactly one fantasy set and then haunted the warehouse for years. Each new element looked harmless. Together, they were lethal. Every unique element demanded its own steel mold, its own color recipes, its own quality tests, its own spot in the global supply chain. Molds cost serious money, took months to make, and then sat there demanding to be used. Forecasting became a nightmare. Some parts sold out, others gathered dust, and the company was losing around $1 million a day. The brick system that once brought discipline was now drowning in its own creativity. So the new leadership did something that sounded almost suicidal. They ordered an element massacre. Roughly half of Lego's unique elements would disappear. No more automatic green light every time a designer wanted a new curve or a slightly different shade of gray. From now on, designers and engineers would work with a sharply reduced, standardized palette. Inside the design studios, the reaction was immediate: shock, disbelief, and then quiet anger. For years, designers had been rewarded for inventing new parts. That was the job. That was the glory. That was the power. Now they were told to build thrilling dragons, sleek race cars, and movie worlds using the same humble bricks everyone else used. Many feared the sets would look cheaper, less magical, less worthy of a child's attention in a world racing toward digital wealth and high-definition screens. Yet on the factory side, the change felt like oxygen. Fewer molds meant lower capital costs, faster changeovers, and simpler maintenance. The supply chain shrank from a jungle into something that could actually be mapped. Forecasting improved because the same versatile elements appeared across dozens of sets. Inventory risk fell. Obsolete mountains of oddly shaped plastic stopped piling up in dark corners of warehouses. And then something unexpected happened. Constraints, the thing everyone feared, began to unlock creativity. Designers rediscovered that Lego was never about perfect replicas. It was about suggestion, about what the brick invited the mind to finish. Using a tighter library of elements, they found clever ways to create angles, textures, and details that felt fresh yet familiar. The system regained its purity. Let me take you back to the question haunting the boardroom, though. All this discipline, all this ruthless simplification might save the balance sheet. But would it save the play? In an age of PlayStations, rising smartphones, and cinematic universes, would children still choose a modest, standardized plastic brick over an entire digital world calling their name? The answer, inside Lego headquarters, began with a sentence. Under Jürgen's leadership, a new mantra spread through design studios, meeting rooms, even factory floors. You are not designing toys, you are designing a system. Not a spaceship, not a dragon, a system. That single shift took the problem out of the fashion business and pushed it back into engineering, into philosophy, into the question of what this empire of plastic was really selling in the first place. Let me take you back to those product reviews in the crisis era. A set lived or died on the catalog page. Big wings, unique molds, neon colors, instant shelf appeal. If it photographed well and tied into a hot license, it passed. Whether the parts actually worked with the wider family of bricks, whether a child could tear it apart and build 100 new models, that was an afterthought, if it was a thought at all. Now the criteria turned ruthless. Every new element had to justify its existence in the system. Designers were pushed to favor brick-built solutions over giant one-off pieces, to ask how a cockpit canopy, a wheel arch, a window frame would behave when thrown into a random box of older parts. Sets were judged not just by how they looked assembled, but by how valuable their parts would be once the original model was long gone and the instructions had disappeared under a bed. There was a time when Lego chased novelty by abandoning what made it powerful. Under the new regime, it chased novelty inside strict boundaries. That meant going back to classic themes: city, castle, space, trains. Brick-heavy boxes with simple construction-driven play, reissues of bestsellers from the 1970s and 80s, modernized with better colors and a few clever mechanisms, but still utterly faithful to the old language of studs and tubes. Parents recognized them. children destroyed them and rebuilt them. Sales quietly answered the boardroom's question. Because of this shift, Lego began to see itself less as a toy company and more as a steward of a creative language. Compatibility was sacred. A brick from 1973 had to click with a brick from 2023. And that continuity wasn't nostalgia, it was long-term play value, generational wealth in plastic form. His story is one of a family firm learning that its real power was not characters or plots, but a grammar of shapes that could survive any trend. Here's the pattern interrupt. On one side of the table, a flashy, articulated action figure from the crisis years, molded armor, almost no studs, impossible to recombine. On the other, a plain box of bricks, no license, no story included, just potential. Which one feels more exciting in a TV ad, and which one nearly killed the company? It's an example of what happens when a brand forgets that the simplest object can carry the deepest promise. At times inspiring and at times chilling, this return to the brick would prepare Lego for its next move, using that humble system to plug into some of the biggest universes on Earth without losing its soul. There was a time when Lego designers trusted their gut more than any spreadsheet, when a set got made because someone in Billund loved it, not because anyone had watched a child touch it. That era was about to end, quietly, on living room floors and in school playrooms, with a stopwatch and a notebook. Let me take you back to those sessions. Researchers would dump a new set in front of a group of kids, step back, and simply watch. How long did it take before the first brick clicked into place? At what minute did attention wander? Which elements became favorites, passed around like treasure, and which slid to the bottom of the box, never to be touched again? It was slow, almost forensic work, but it cut through years of comforting myths. One myth said children were bored of just bricks. The data said something harsher. Kids weren't bored of the brick. They were bored of a story that ended too quickly. If the set built into one perfect spaceship, with one correct solution, engagement fell off a cliff the moment the instructions ended. The model went on a shelf. The play went somewhere else, often to a screen. When the build allowed rebuilding, when the core structure could be torn apart and reimagined without needing a PhD in geometry, the session kept going, sometimes for hours. Another myth claimed that more specialized parts meant more excitement. The timers disagreed. Highly specific elements that only worked in one context were admired once, then abandoned. Meanwhile, the humble 2x4 brick, the wedge, the hinge, were used, rebuilt, smashed together into castles, cars, and creatures with a life that no designer in an office could have predicted. His story is one of a company discovering that its most powerful asset was not novelty, but repeatable possibility. Inside Lego, a second revolution was unfolding. Sets and themes were no longer judged just by how cool they looked in a catalog, but by hard numbers, profitability by line, by region, by year, build times, repurchase rates, concept tests that could quietly kill a passion project before it devoured millions. Ideas that didn't meet clear thresholds were cut, even if they had been someone's personal favorite. At times inspiring and at times chilling, this new discipline turned creativity into something that had to answer to reality. For designers, it was a cultural shock. The model that felt like art might die. The one that looked plain might live because kids kept rebuilding it and parents kept buying it. Executives learned that power now meant listening to children who could not pronounce strategy but could absolutely vote with their hands. And as Lego reconnected with those young builders, another pattern emerged in the data. A different group kept showing up, buying complex sets, writing long emails, treating the brick like a lifelong language. Lego was about to discover an unexpected ally that would supercharge its comeback: the grown-ups who never stopped building. These weren't parents quietly stepping on bricks in the dark. These were adults spending thousands of dollars and thousands of hours building entire cities in their basements. Lego gave them a name: A-Falls, adult fans of Lego. There was a time when that sounded like a punchline, a quirky subculture of engineers, architects, and accountants who never let go of a childhood toy. But inside this group was something far more serious: concentrated money, obsessive skill, and a loyalty most brands would kill for. Let me take you back to the early 2000s. While Lego's core business was collapsing, this parallel world was thriving. A-Falls were reverse engineering retired sets, trading rare pieces, and designing custom models that dwarfed anything on store shelves. Train layouts that filled gymnasiums, star destroyers longer than a dining table, medieval castles wired with lights, moving gates, and hidden rooms. They were treating the brick less like a toy and more like a creative operating system. At first, Lego watched from a distance. The company saw fan websites, early YouTube videos, and sprawling conventions like Brickfest and later BrickCon, where grown adults would travel across countries just to show each other plastic creations for a weekend. It looked niche, harmless, even a bit funny. But when executives walked those convention floors, something clicked. These people knew the product better than many employees. They could recite mold numbers from memory, explain which clutch power felt right for different age groups, and predict which sets would fail months before sales data arrived. Because of that ruthless attention to detail and their willingness to speak bluntly, A-Falls became an unexpected mirror, reflecting back everything Lego was doing wrong. So Lego did something unusual for a proud, family-owned empire. It opened the gates. The company created direct email channels to prominent community leaders, started sending designers to fan events, and launched early ambassador programs where select A-Falls could relay feedback from the wider community. They were invited into workshops in Billund, shown prototype elements, and asked questions that sounded almost heretical inside a toy company. What do adults want to build, and why? The answers carried a strategic shock. If the brick was treated as a lifelong hobby rather than a brief phase between ages 5 and 12, the entire economics of the business changed. A child might buy 1 set a year. An adult fan might buy 10, plus storage, display cases, and tickets to Lego conventions. It's an example of what happens when a company stops chasing the next fad and starts deepening the world around its core. From this realization came an even bolder idea, at times inspiring and at times chilling for traditional managers. What if those fans didn't just review products? What if they helped decide what Lego made next? That question would lead Lego to one of the most radical experiments in its history, where part of the product roadmap would no longer belong to executives in Denmark, but to a global crowd of obsessed builders. And when that crowd was finally handed real power, everything changed. That power didn't arrive in a boardroom memo or a glossy ad campaign. It arrived on a quiet little website with a strange name: Kusu. There was a time when Lego still believed the future would be decided by its own designers, its own instincts, its own internal empire of taste. Kusu, launched in partnership with a Japanese company in 2008, looked almost harmless by comparison. An online experiment where fans could upload their dream sets, share them, and beg other fans to support them. No TV spots, no giant launch, just a digital suggestion box with ambition. But this was not a vague, send us your ideas black hole. It had a ruthless, simple rule. If a fan design reached a fixed threshold of supporters, first 1,000, then eventually 10,000, LEGO would be forced to look at it. Not as a cute fan tribute, but as a candidate for real money, real production, real shelf space. Hit the number, and the project triggered a formal review by LEGO designers, engineers, and business analysts. Here the deal became almost shocking for a toy company that had nearly died trying to control everything. If LEGO approved the set, the fan creator would be credited on the box and receive a share of the revenue. Not only did the crowd get a voice, it got a contract. The company that once flooded stores with untested themes was now saying to fans, "Prove demand first, then we'll build it together." The early results were at times inspiring and at times chilling in what they revealed. Fans pushed through a LEGO Shinkai 6500 deep-sea submersible in Japan, then a detailed Minecraft micro-world just as that game's popularity exploded. Later came cult hits like the DeLorean from Back to the Future, a meticulous NASA Mars rover, and the Women of NASA set. Each one was a niche idea by corporate standards, a risky bet that traditional managers might have ignored. Yet when they finally hit shelves, many sold out, drew press coverage, and built a new kind of cultural power for the brand. It's an example of what happens when a company stops guessing what people want and lets its most obsessive fans filter the noise. Instead of brainstorming in isolation, LEGO watched which proposals accumulated tens of thousands of votes, passionate comments, and fan-made marketing long before a mold was cut. The community was doing free focus groups, free trend spotting, even free promotion. And something deeper changed. Fans were no longer just buying bricks. They were auditioning to shape the lineup, arguing over what deserved to exist, living inside the company's future roadmap. LEGO Ideas, as Kusu was rebranded in 2014, turned the brand from a one-way broadcast into a collaborative ecosystem where the boundary between designer and customer began to blur. Contrast that with the pre-crisis era, when top-down, ego-driven decisions flooded the world with throwaway themes no one had asked for. Now the same company was, in effect, bowing to the crowd and asking, almost humbly, "What should we build next?" But giving the crowd a voice is one thing. Letting it reshape a global toy empire is another. And that would demand an even bolder step. Let me take you back to 1999. LEGO is still pretending everything is fine. Sales haven't crashed yet. The word crisis isn't being whispered in boardrooms, and the company is still chasing wild experiments. But in the background, something quietly revolutionary lands on toy shelves. LEGO Star Wars. Not only is it one of LEGO's first big licenses, it arrives just before the empire nearly runs out of money. There was a time when the very idea of licensing horrified LEGO's leadership. The family had spent decades insisting the brick should stand on its own, that children didn't need Hollywood to tell them how to play. Slapping another company's logo on their life's work felt like surrender. Yet when those first X-Wings, TIE fighters, and tiny yellow Luke Skywalkers appeared, something strange happened. They sold. Fast. Because of the emotional pull of Star Wars, parents who had grown up with the films now had a reason to walk back into the toy aisle. Kids who might have ignored a generic space set suddenly begged for a Millennium Falcon. But crucially, under the plastic helmets and printed torsos, the system was still pure LEGO. Bricks clicked together the same way. Ships could be rebuilt into anything, and the fantasy didn't end when the instructions did. The license provided the story. The brick still provided the freedom. When the crisis finally hit and Jürgen Vig Knudstorp took power, licensing could have become a crutch. A desperate company could have said, "More logos, more characters, more shortcuts to sales. It's an example of what happens when a brand forgets what made it special in the first place. Jurgen did the opposite. He treated Star Wars not as a cheat code, but as a test. Could a powerful story live inside the Lego system without breaking it? Under his disciplined regime, every licensed theme had to obey the same ruthless rules as any other product line. Elements had to remain compatible. Build quality couldn't slip. Designers weren't allowed to just sculpt movie props. They had to translate them into bricks that still encouraged open play. If a license demanded strange, one-off molds that bloated complexity and costs, it was cut or reworked, no matter how famous the logo. So Lego leaned into a small inner circle of worlds: Star Wars, Harry Potter, later Marvel, and a few others. Not dozens of random tie-ins, not a noisy wall of disconnected brands, a focused alliance. Each one brought a ready-made audience and deep story universe, but all of them were forced to speak the same visual language of studs, plates, and beams. The result was a paradox. By borrowing other people's stories, Lego protected its own identity. These themes didn't just rescue quarterly sales. They trained a generation to see Lego as the way you enter a fictional universe. And that quiet shift would set up something even bigger. A moment when Lego would stop merely licensing other people's worlds and start turning its own brick-built universe into the center of global pop culture. Lego had learned how to borrow other people's galaxies. Now it had to learn something harder: how to say no to its own. There was a time when almost any colorful pitch could slip through the door, but after the crisis, that door became a steel gate with a lock, a code, and a security guard with a spreadsheet. Under Jürgen Vig Knudstorp, new products faced a trial. Not only did they need a cool story, they needed clear financial targets, hard projections on margin, and a path to profitability that wasn't just wishful thinking. Every concept was checked against the brick system. Could it be built mainly from existing elements? Could it reuse molds? Could it live inside the empire of interlocking studs rather than demanding an entirely new language of plastic? If the answer was no, the project started with a handicap. Prototypes still got built, but now they lived in a kind of gladiator arena. Designs went through small market tests, kid play labs, adult fan reviews, and brutal internal costings. Some made it to the final round, sitting in glossy presentations with projected sales curves and brand impact charts. And then, even there, some were quietly executed. Inside the company, there are stories of sets that teams had poured their life into for years, only to be killed weeks before launch. A beautiful, intricate play theme that children loved in testing, but required too many unique elements, pushing the cost per box beyond what parents would pay. A futuristic vehicle line that designers adored, but which overlapped with another strategic theme and risked cannibalizing a proven moneymaker. In the old days, these would have shipped anyway. Now, the verdict could be ruthless. Great work, wrong fit. Shut it down. For the people who made them, it stung. Yet over time, something unexpected happened. With the rules finally clear, creativity stopped chasing chaos. Designers knew the financial guardrails, the element budget, the requirement to plug into the existing system. Within that tight frame, they began to push harder, not softer, twisting familiar pieces into impossible shapes, finding new play patterns without demanding a new factory every season. It's an example of what happens when constraint stops being a prison and becomes a design brief. Let me take you back to the pre-crisis era for contrast. Back then, if a concept looked exciting, it could sprint from sketch to shelf with little regard for long-term coherence. New molds, new colors, new packaging, new categories. The portfolio ballooned into something at times inspiring and at times chilling. A scattered archipelago of ideas that shared a logo, but not a logic. Money went out faster than it came in. Now, the portfolio shrank, but the power of each theme grew. Fewer bets, higher stakes, deeper worlds. And this new discipline was about to face its most dangerous test yet, when someone inside LEGO proposed an idea that broke every safe rule at once. Take the entire brand, every memory, every brick, and gamble it all on a Hollywood movie. There was a time when the words LEGO movie sounded less like a strategy and more like the punchline to a nervous joke. The company had just crawled back from the edge of financial collapse, had sold off its theme parks to stop the bleeding, and was finally seeing real wealth return to the toy shelf. And now, someone wanted to march the brand straight into Hollywood, the same glittering arena that had nearly killed it a decade earlier. Let me take you back to the early 2010s. Jürgen Vig Knudstorp's discipline had done its work. The wild experiments were gone. The brick system was back at the center of life inside the company, and themes like Star Wars and Harry Potter were turning plastic into money with ruthless efficiency. LEGO was no longer losing $1 million a day. But the memory of that poverty, of almost running out of cash, still haunted the boardroom. So when a pitch arrived for a full-length animated feature, it landed like a small explosion. A movie that didn't just feature LEGO as a background product placement, but as the entire world. Minifigures as heroes, bricks as landscapes, the laws of the system turned into the laws of physics. The tone would be fast, self-aware, full of meta-commentary about creativity and control, yet anchored by a real emotional story about belonging and family. It sounded ambitious. It also sounded like 1999 all over again. Because the last time LEGO chased an empire in entertainment, it had gone wide instead of deep. Theme parks, TV projects, video games, media ventures that swallowed cash and attention while the core business quietly rotted. Now the fear inside the company was simple and at times chilling. Was this movie a clever extension of the brick, or a shiny distraction that would drag LEGO back into the same swamp of overreach and ego? The difference this time lay in how the power was arranged. LEGO would not try to become a studio. It would not build its own Hollywood campus or pretend that making films was just like molding plastic. Instead, it partnered with Warner Brothers and experienced filmmakers like Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, people who actually knew how to turn chaos into a coherent story. Contracts were written with surgical precision. LEGO kept tight control over how the brand looked, spoke, and behaved on screen. Inside Billund, designers and executives repeated a quiet mantra: the movie must serve the brick. Every gag, every chase scene, every universe built from tiny pieces had to feel like something a child could recreate on the living room floor. The film was treated as another way to show what the system could do, not as a rival empire built on top of it. When the LEGO movie finally hit theaters in 2014, the result would stun not only the cautious Danes who had approved it, but an entire Hollywood machine that had underestimated a plastic toy. And the way audiences reacted would change what LEGO dared to attempt next. The shock came fast. A movie about a plastic brick made by a studio with no superheroes, no wizards, and no built-in story exploded into one of the most praised family films of the decade. The LEGO movie cost around $60 million to make and pulled in nearly $500 million at the global box office. But the real number that mattered was stranger: a 90-something% score on Rotten Tomatoes for what many expected to be a 2-hour commercial. Critics called it sharp, self-aware, even moving. Parents laughed at the corporate villain named Lord Business. Kids repeated, "Everything is awesome," until entire families surrendered. And beneath the chaos of jokes and explosions, there was something else. An emotional core about a father, a son, and a box of bricks. There was a time when Lego content was an awkward add-on, direct to DVD, and instantly forgotten. This was different. This was Hollywood validating the brick as culture, not clutter. The themes were not an accident. On screen, the war between following the instructions and building freely drives the entire plot. Emmett lives in a world ruled by manuals, step-by-step rules, and fear of breaking the model. The master builders tear everything apart and rebuild on instinct. That tension mirrored Lego's own life over the previous decade, a company that had drowned in hyper-controlled sets, rigid storylines, and pre-molded pieces trying to rediscover open-ended play. Because the film dared to say that both sides were needed, it also quietly told the story of Lego's turnaround. Instructions give beginners confidence. Free building unlocks imagination. The power comes when the system lets you move between them. It's an example of what happens when a brand looks in the mirror and then writes the mirror into the script. The father gluing models together was every executive who once tried to lock the product into one perfect shape. Then came the halo. After release, Lego's sales surged again, with analysts openly crediting the movie for renewed momentum. Lapsed fans who had not touched a brick since childhood found themselves in theaters, then in toy aisles, then on living room floors late at night, helping children build sets that mysteriously matched their own nostalgia. Lego stopped being just a toy and started to look like a shared language, a cross-generational empire built on tiny rectangles. Here is the pattern interrupt. A movie had nearly killed Lego in spirit when the company chased flashy media projects during its crisis years. Now a movie became the clearest expression of its true philosophy. The difference was discipline. Instead of flooding shelves with random tie-ins, Lego released sets that echoed scenes from the film, but still clicked into every other brick made since the 1950s. No sealed, sacred models. No rival universe. Just more ways to use the same system. Let me take you back to that living room table in the final scene. A child, a parent, a pile of mixed bricks. That image would guide what Lego did next, on screens, in theme parks, and in the hands of millions who finally saw the company not as a fading toy maker, but as a modern legend of play. That living room table was the promise. But to make that promise real for millions of families, Lego had to do something far less magical and far more brutal: rebuild the machine that sat behind the bricks. There was a time when Lego's factories looked like its product line in the early 2000s, scattered, bloated, and wildly inefficient. Too many plants in too many places, each running its own molds, its own colors, its own schedules. The result was late deliveries, overflowing warehouses, and a company that, by 2003, was burning through money at a terrifying rate. If the empire of play was going to survive, the pipes underneath had to be ripped out and replaced. So the leadership went to work. They consolidated factories, shut down the weakest sites, and moved high-volume production closer to where demand actually was. In the Czech Republic and Mexico, new plants rose that were designed from the ground up for speed and scale. Robots handled repetitive tasks. Towering automated storage systems tracked pallets, and production runs were no longer set by gut feeling, but by hard forecasts tied to real sales data from retailers around the world. This wasn't just about making more bricks. It was about making the right bricks at the right time. Popular themes like Star Wars and City were given priority lanes. Seasonal waves were planned with military precision. When a set exploded in popularity, the company could ramp up quickly instead of watching empty shelves and apologizing to angry parents. When a niche product stalled, production could be cut before warehouses filled with plastic that might never leave the box. Underneath all that, another obsession quietly ruled: quality. Lego had always promised that a brick from the 1970s would still click perfectly with a brick made today. Now that promise became non-negotiable, even as production spread across continents. Molds were calibrated to microscopic tolerances. Colors were standardized so that red meant the same red in Denmark, Hungary, or Mexico, and random samples were tortured in test labs to make sure clutch power stayed within an absurdly tight band. A child might never know which factory a piece came from, and that was exactly the point. As operations tightened, logistics followed. Advanced planning systems predicted which sets would spike in which countries. Inventory levels were tracked almost in real time, cutting stockouts on bestsellers and quietly killing off low-demand curiosities that once clogged shelves. Warehouses shrank, margins improved, and the company finally stopped paying to store its own mistakes. Because of these invisible changes, every hit theme became more profitable, more scalable, more controllable. The life of the company no longer swung wildly with each Christmas season. It's an example of what happens when a playful brand decides to become deadly serious about execution. Let me take you back to that cheerful logo on the box. Behind it, Lego was turning into something else entirely. A ruthlessly efficient industrial and data machine wrapped in the skin of a toy company. And that new machine was about to power Lego far beyond the living room table. Behind that smiling logo, another tension was building. Lego was no longer just a cozy Danish workshop making toys for the neighborhood. It was an empire stretched across continents, licenses, and factories, run by a family that still thought in terms of craft, while the numbers screamed for discipline. There was a time when decisions were made at the kitchen table in Billund. Legendary designers sketched new sets with almost no constraints, guided by feel, tradition, and a quiet sense of duty to children. Success meant a beautiful model, a clever building technique, a toy that made a designer proud. Profit was expected, of course, but it was background noise, not the main melody. By the early 2000s, that mindset had nearly killed the company. Now, Jørgen Vig Knudstorp walked in with a different message. The family story would stay, but the family habits would not. Quality, creativity, and a ruthless focus on the child would remain sacred. Everything else was negotiable. So let me take you back to those first internal meetings. Designers who had never seen a P&L were suddenly shown charts. Lines going down. Losses measured not in vague concern, but in, we are losing nearly $1 million a day. For a culture raised on intuition, seeing the numbers laid bare was like turning on the lights in a room everyone preferred to keep dim. His story is one of balancing warmth and cold calculation. On one side, Jørgen repeated the old values almost like a prayer. Only the best is good enough. Respect the brick. Protect the child's imagination. On the other, he introduced performance metrics, target margins, and accountability for every theme. Designers were no longer just artists. They were stewards of a system that had to earn its right to exist. Inside Lego, the definition of winning quietly changed. A set was no longer a success just because it looked cool on the box or picked up a design award. It had to fit the core system of the brick, support long-term play, hit profitability targets, and prove children actually loved it over time. A beautiful but incoherent theme that confused parents or demanded dozens of new, expensive elements. That was now a failure, no matter how exciting the prototype looked. To make this real, Jürgen rewired the rituals. Regular strategy updates replaced vague hallway rumors. Performance data was shared broadly, not hidden in finance. Leaders publicly praised teams that killed their own pet projects when the numbers and the system logic said no. Quiet, disciplined decisions started getting as much applause as flashy product launches. It was at times inspiring and at times chilling, especially for veterans who remembered the looser, more romantic days. It's an example of what happens when a family company finally accepts that love alone cannot pay its bills. Lego had forged a new culture, one that worshipped both the child and the spreadsheet. And just when this fragile balance seemed to be working, an old threat returned in a new form. The next wave of digital play was rising, and the brick would be tested like never before. There was a time when the enemy was a gray plastic box under the TV. Now, the enemy glowed in a child's hand, followed them into the car, the bedroom, the dinner table. By 2010, the iPad, the iPhone, and a tidal wave of free apps were swallowing childhood attention spans whole. Consoles had been weekend visitors. Smartphones moved in as permanent family members. Let me take you back to those late 2000s years. Toy shelves still looked familiar, but the real action was happening in invisible app stores, where a few taps could summon 1,000 games, endless video, and dopamine on demand. For a company that sold silence, patience, and small plastic bricks, this was not a gentle trend. This was an extinction-level event in slow motion. The same question echoed in boardrooms everywhere. Why would a child wrestle with a box of bricks when a screen could give instant fireworks? The old Lego, the one that had chased CD-ROM games and theme park fantasies, might have panicked again, throwing money at wild digital bets, trying to become the next tech empire overnight. But this new Lego was still haunted by near poverty and near collapse. The scars from the 1990s were fresh, and they acted like a governor on executive ambition. His story is one of a company that had already learned what happens when you fall in love with the future and forget the product that paid for the past. So the approach changed. Instead of declaring, "We are now a digital company," Lego moved with something unusual in corporate life: humility, small experiments, tight budgets, clear rules. Digital could extend the brick, but it could not replace it. Designers worked on apps that unlocked bonus missions for physical sets, like scanning a code on a Lego Ninjago box to trigger battles on a phone. Building instructions migrated into sleek apps where kids could rotate models in 3D, zoom into tricky connections, and rebuild without crumpled paper. Even the games shifted tone. Titles like Lego Star Wars and Lego Batman didn't try to be hyper-realistic shooters. They were digital slapstick, playful extensions of the same universe, gently nudging players back toward the physical sets on the shelf. The brick stayed the star. The screen became the billboard, the sidekick, the translator. Then came the pattern interrupt inside the company itself. While the rest of the world asked, "How do we become a tech company?" Lego's leadership asked a colder, sharper question: what can we do that screens never will? A tablet could simulate 1,000 explosions, but it could not give the weight of a half-finished spaceship in a child's hands. A phone could offer infinite worlds, but not the quiet pride of seeing one imperfect world, self-built, on the bedroom floor. It was a strategic act of restraint. Lego would not try to outscreen the screens. Instead, it positioned the brick as the antidote: tactile, slow, stubbornly three-dimensional. While competitors chased virtual pets and disposable apps, Lego doubled down on the friction of reality, betting that in a life saturated with light and sound, the most powerful experience might be the one that did not need a battery. That bet opened the door to something even more radical. If Lego was the antidote to digital overload, how far could it push that identity without losing the next generation entirely? There was a time when Lego's answer to that question was brutally simple. You make the bricks grow up with the child. Not by abandoning the system, but by stretching it until it could sit on a child's floor, an architect's desk, and a designer's showroom, all at once. Let me take you back to the late 2000s, when a strange sight began appearing in living rooms. On one shelf sat a child's Star Wars X-Wing. Right next to it, a pristine white model of the Guggenheim Museum, or the Sears Tower, built from tiny, almost ascetic Lego elements. This was Lego architecture, officially licensed, co-developed with real architects, and marketed unapologetically to adults who had money, taste, and a weakness for clean lines. The move looked simple. It wasn't. Architecture sets took the same interlocking bricks and used them like drafting tools, emphasizing proportion, rhythm, and silhouette instead of minifigure adventures. Because the system was consistent, a child's basic brick and an adult's display model were speaking the same visual language. Suddenly, Lego wasn't just a toy, it was a legitimate medium for people who thought in buildings, not spaceships. At the same time, another frontier was opening. Technic. There was a time when Technic was seen as the weird cousin of the Lego family, all beams and gears, and not much charm. Now, it became an engineering playground. Advanced Technic supercars arrived with working gearboxes, independent suspension, even paddle shifters, a plastic chassis on the outside, a mechanical lesson on the inside. This wasn't done alone. Lego went directly to the sources of real-world power and prestige: Porsche, Bugatti, Lamborghini, Ferrari. Collaborations with car manufacturers turned Technic into a parallel showroom where a $3 million hypercar could be rebuilt, piece by piece, on a kitchen table. Because of that discipline around the brick, these models were not cheap imitations. They were dense, functional sculptures that engineers, hobbyists, and collectors could respect. It's an example of what happens when a company treats its system as sacred. Every architecture set, every Technic flagship, still had to obey the same stud dimensions, the same tolerances, the same click. The result was at times inspiring and at times chilling. A children's toy line quietly evolving into a modular design tool that could model skyscrapers, robots, even factory layouts. Behind the scenes, a life cycle strategy was hardening into place. Capture a child with City and Ninjago. Retain the teenager with Technic, Mindstorms, and intricate licensed worlds. Then, when life and work and family have taken over, welcome that same person back with architecture skylines, 5,000-piece display sets, and premium collectibles that promise nostalgia and status in the same cardboard box. By now, Lego had not only saved itself, it had built a soft empire that followed people from childhood to retirement. But when a brand can command that much loyalty, that much money, and that much cultural power, another, quieter question emerges. Could success itself become the next threat? Because once an empire is safe, the real danger is what happens next. Not the fight for survival, but the quiet, comfortable drift that comes after victory. When money is flowing, awards are piling up, and everyone assumes the good times will last forever. There was a time when Lego's problem was that no one wanted its toys. Now, the problem was different. Everyone wanted everything. Retailers begged for more themes, more waves, more exclusives. Hollywood studios called with new franchises. Analysts expected double-digit growth, year after year, as if physics no longer applied to plastic bricks. Success, the very thing that had saved the company from poverty, began to whisper a new command: more. Let me take you back to the early 2010s. Lego Star Wars and Harry Potter were printing money. The Lego Movie turned a Danish family toy into a global media icon. Overnight, licensing went from a rescue line to a gold rush. Superheroes, Middle-earth, Disney princesses, video game tie-ins. Each new deal promised another spike in revenue, another reason to believe the turnaround was permanent. The temptation was obvious. If a few big licenses could revive the brand, imagine what a dozen could do. But there was a darker mirror to that logic. Every new logo on the box meant another promise to fulfill, another set line to maintain, another slice of shelf space. Too many sets, too many tie-ins, too many near-identical spaceships and castles risked turning Lego from a clear idea into visual noise. Parents began to complain that the wall of boxes felt overwhelming. Longtime fans wondered if the brick had become a delivery system for other people's stories instead of a canvas for their own. Inside Billund, the debates grew sharper. How far should the company push licensing before the brand stopped feeling like Lego and started feeling like an advertising platform? How many movies, spin-off shows, and streaming experiments could the market absorb before audiences tuned out? The memory of the 1990s still haunted the boardroom. Back then, the overreach had been theme parks, clothing, and watches. Now the risk was drowning the core in an endless ocean of content. Subtle warning signs began to appear. A licensed theme would launch with great fanfare, only to be quietly retired 2 years later. Some sets felt strangely hollow, elaborate shells built around one nostalgic logo, thin on genuine play. Online, adult fans who had helped rescue the brand started to murmur that Lego was leaning too heavily on big franchises and repeating old hits. At times inspiring, and at times chilling, the feedback sounded eerily like a distant echo from the years before the crash. Because under all the hype, the same old question was still waiting. When a company has this much power, this much loyalty, this much wealth riding on constant novelty, how do you keep innovating without betraying your core? And as Lego stared down its new age of success, it was about to discover just how hard that question really is. There was a time when most companies that reached Lego's size did the same predictable thing. They went public, chased quarterly earnings, and slowly traded soul for scale. Lego did something else. It quietly built guardrails against its own success. At the center of those guardrails is a family name, Kirk Christiansen. The same family that started with wooden ducks in a Danish workshop still controls the empire today, not through a flashy personal holding company, but through a layered structure that looks almost boring on paper and incredibly powerful in practice. The family owns Lego through Kirkbi, and wrapped around that is the Lego Foundation, a massive charitable owner with a mission that goes far beyond toys. Because of that structure, Lego lives in a different time zone than Wall Street. There are no quarterly earnings calls to appease, no activist hedge fund demanding 10,000 layoffs by Friday. When management chooses to spend heavily on better materials, safer molds, or more sustainable packaging, the question is not, what will this do to next quarter's profit? But, what will this do to the brick 10 years from now? It's an example of what happens when the people in charge care more about legacy than about this year's bonus. Take quality and sustainability. The company pours money into precision molds, color consistency, and long-term experiments with plant-based plastics, even when the payback is distant and messy. Short-term, margins could be fatter with cheaper plastic and looser tolerances. Long-term, Every parent who opens a shoebox of 30-year-old bricks and finds them still snapping perfectly is looking at an unpaid marketing campaign. That is brand health purchased with patience. But this is not just a family fiefdom making sentimental decisions over coffee. After the near collapse of the early 2000s, the governance hardened. Independent board members were brought in, people with enough distance to say no when the room gets excited. Clear strategic frameworks were written down, not as slogans, but as filters. Does this idea strengthen the core system or dilute it? And sitting in those meetings is an institutional ghost, the memory of 2003, when Lego was losing about $1 million a day and selling off Legoland parks just to survive. Pattern interrupt. Think about the opposite path. There are brands that raced to IPO, licensed their names to everything that moved, opened 100 stores a year, and then watched their identity hollow out under shareholder pressure. Toys that became movies, that became cereal, that became clearance bins. The story is at times inspiring and at times chilling, because the growth works until it doesn't. Inside Lego, the language is different. Executives talk about stewardship, not conquest. Designers are told, "You are not designing toys, you're designing a system." The brick, the geometry, the promise that any set from any decade can still connect is treated like a cultural asset on loan from the world. That creates a quiet moral check against reckless expansion. When someone proposes a dazzling new venture, the question comes back, will this honor the system or cannibalize it for fast money? Guardrails, though, are only as strong as the people who respect them. The next test would come when Lego tried to grow far beyond the toy aisle into movies, theme parks, and digital worlds, without repeating the same old mistakes. There was a time when Lego treated its near-death experience like a family might treat an embarrassing uncle at Christmas. Everyone knew. No one talked. That silence nearly killed the company once. It would not get a second chance. So inside Lego, the early 2000s crisis has been turned into a permanent cautionary tale. New leaders are walked through the numbers. The year the company lost money for the first time in its life. The period around 2003, when it was burning close to $1 million a day. The moment the bank quietly asked whether the empire of the brick was still a going concern. Let me take you back to those internal sessions. Slide after slide shows exploding complexity, lines of tiny plastic elements multiplying like weeds, while profits shrink. The message is blunt. This is what happens when creativity runs ahead of discipline. Those stories are not told once and forgotten. They are woven into onboarding, leadership training, even design reviews. A young manager hears how the company chased every trend, from action figures to strange electronic hybrids, while the core brick system was neglected. A new designer is shown sets from that era with hundreds of unique pieces that never appeared again, then asked to explain how that helped children play. The answer is usually a quiet pause. Out of that pain came frameworks with long memories. Internal principles now call out the old sins by name. No uncontrolled element proliferation. No unfocused diversification far from the brick. No major bet without hard data from kids, parents, and retailers. There are checklists asking whether a new theme can reuse existing molds, whether it strengthens the system, whether the business case survives if the hype fades. It sounds dry, almost bureaucratic. It is actually a memorial, because behind the PowerPoints stand people. Veteran employees who lived through the layoffs, who remember selling off most of the Legoland parks just to raise cash, who watched colleagues pack their desks while wondering if the family company was finally over. They sit in meetings and, when a proposal starts to smell like 1999, they speak up. This looks like when we chased multimedia toys. This feels like when we ignored the data from kids. Their presence is a quiet, ruthless form of risk management. His story is one of almost losing everything and then choosing to remember. Lego's resilience today, its ability to expand into movies, games, and digital worlds without blowing itself apart again, rests on that choice. By treating failure as a teacher instead of a shameful secret, the company has built a culture that is at times inspiring and at times chilling in its self-awareness. It knows how close it came to poverty, even as it swims in wealth. And this is not just a Lego story. From airlines to tech giants, the same pattern appears: rapid rise, reckless expansion, brutal crash, then a choice. Will they institutionalize the pain while they still have time, or wait to learn the lesson when it is already too late? There was a time when being a famous brand meant safety. You got the front of the toy aisle, the center of the mall, the top shelf at the electronics store, and everyone assumed that would last forever. Lego's near-death experience is a reminder that fame is not a moat. It is a spotlight that makes every mistake more expensive. Let me take you back to the late 90s and early 2000s, not to Denmark this time, but to the wider corporate world. While Lego was launching theme parks, clothing lines, and over-designed sets that barely used bricks, consumer electronics giants were doing the same dance. Sony drifted from iconic Walkmans and PlayStations into pets, robots, and a maze of overlapping gadgets. Nokia, once the king of mobile phones, exploded its product lines until there were dozens of nearly identical devices and no clear vision of the future. Everyone was powerful, until suddenly they were not. In retail, the pattern was just as ruthless. Sears went from the Amazon of its day to a confused holding company dabbling in financial services, real estate, and private labels, while the core experience rotted. In media, giants chased every trend at once: print, cable, streaming, apps, all launched with grand promises and no clear center. It is an example of what happens when leadership starts believing the brand can be stretched infinitely, that the empire can expand in every direction without anyone guarding the original fortress. The warning signs are eerily consistent. Product lines that multiply faster than anyone can explain. Strategy decks full of buzzwords, but empty of sentences that mention the actual user. Leaders obsessed with being innovative, yet unable to answer a simple question. Innovative compared to what? And for whom? Money is spent. Power is projected. But the day-to-day experience of the loyal customer quietly decays. Lego lived that life. Unique elements nearly doubled in a few years, costs exploded, and sets became harder to build, harder to reuse, and easier to forget. The brick was still there, but it was no longer the star of its own story. That same blindness hit BlackBerry when keyboards mattered more to executives than apps, and hit Kodak when film profits dulled the urgency of digital. At times inspiring and at times chilling, these companies could point to awards, acquisitions, even new buildings, while the core withered. Lego's turnaround is the counter pattern. Leadership cut product variants, sold off theme parks, and returned to the brick as a system, not a prop. Licensed themes like Star Wars were kept, not because they were trendy, but because they made the core experience stronger. Fewer elements, clearer rules, more disciplined innovation. Wealth returned only when the company accepted that saying no was the most radical move of all. But here is where this stops being a corporate history lesson and turns into something personal. In a company, a project, even a career, over-diversification feels exciting right up until the moment it becomes lethal. So the real question is not what Lego did in 2003. It is what you're doing right now. Where, quietly, are you repeating Lego's pre-crisis mistakes without yet feeling the pain? And how long until your own bricks start to crack? There was a time when Lego forgot what business it was really in. It chased characters, gadgets, and one-off hits, and nearly lost the quiet superpower that had made the company an empire in the first place. A system that compounds every time a child opens a new box. To see it, look at a single brick. Alone, it is almost nothing. Add a second, and it becomes a connection. Add a third, a possibility. Multiply that across decades, and you get the true product Lego sells. Not sets, not themes, but a language of shapes that always speaks the same grammar. Bricks from the 1970s still lock perfectly with bricks from 2024. That is system thinking made physical. System thinking says every new element must strengthen the whole. Every set must plug into every other set, so that each birthday, each holiday, each small purchase quietly increases the value of everything already in the toy box. It's the opposite of a disposable hit. The more you own, the more powerful your collection becomes, and the harder it is to ever leave. Product thinking works differently. Each new toy is a self-contained bet, designed to spike sales this quarter even if it adds chaos to the long term. That was the era when Lego doubled its unique elements, pumped out strange pieces that only worked in one set, and watched costs explode. The short-term numbers looked exciting. The system underneath was rotting. When Jürgen Vig Knudstorp took over, he flipped the logic. Designers were told very directly that they were not designing toys. They were designing a system. Fewer unique molds, more reuse, ruthless standardization of hidden details like tube heights and clutch power. Because of that invisible discipline, a Star Wars wing piece can later become a Harry Potter roof or the hull of a city police boat without anyone noticing the accounting victory baked into the play. Now, pattern interrupt. Imagine Lego had never done this. Imagine every theme had its own incompatible bricks, its own measurements, its own logic. No mixing castles with space, no pirates fighting ninja robots, no chance for a child to pour a decade of birthdays onto the floor and build one insane, sprawling world. Would anyone still care about it today? Or would it be just another forgotten toy line from a forgotten catalog? Let me take you back to your own life for a second. System thinking is not limited to plastic bricks. Software platforms that share one login and one database. Content universes where every story connects. Even careers where each skill reinforces the next instead of scattering across unrelated paths, all follow the same law. His story is one of toys, money, and near poverty. But Lego's survival is also a quiet blueprint for building anything that lasts. Because once you start seeing systems, the next question becomes dangerous. What exactly are you building that still behaves like a disconnected toy? What Lego did next sounds boring. Spreadsheets, limits, rules. Yet this is where the empire is quietly rebuilt, not with explosions of color, but with the ruthless trimming of excess. There was a time when Lego's catalog looked like a garage sale. By the late 90s, the number of unique elements had nearly doubled. New wings, new helmets, new hyper-specific pieces that did one thing and then sat in warehouses like forgotten money. Costs exploded, themes felt disconnected, and the system that once bound everything together began to fracture. So during the turnaround, leadership did something that felt almost sacrilegious. They cut. Hard. Thousands of elements were retired. Designers were told to work with a dramatically smaller palette, to favor multi-purpose bricks over one-off novelties, to to think system before showpiece. On paper, it looked like austerity. In practice, it forced a different level of imagination. If a spaceship wing could no longer be a custom mold, it had to be built from plates and slopes, layered in clever angles. Suddenly, the same parts that made a castle tower could also form the hull of a starfighter. Themes stopped feeling like isolated toy lines and started to feel like one connected language again. Psychologists have long noticed this pattern. When choices are infinite, the brain gets lazy or overwhelmed. Constraint narrows the field, which paradoxically deepens problem solving. In creative practice, from music to architecture, some of the most iconic work comes from strict rules, limited keys, fixed budgets, brutal deadlines. It's an example of what happens when freedom is channeled rather than sprayed in every direction. Inside Lego, the shift was not greeted with universal applause. Veteran designers complained that the new rules were choking their art. They had grown used to phoning the mold shop whenever an idea got inconvenient. But as projects moved forward, something uncomfortable happened. Sets designed under the tighter system felt sharper. Builds were more satisfying. Fan feedback improved. And one by one, designers started admitting, sometimes with a reluctant smile, that the discipline had made their work stronger. Let me take you back to that psychological moment, when a creative person realizes the obstacle is actually the scaffolding. At times inspiring and at times chilling, because it suggests that chaos masquerading as innovation is not visionary, it is just chaos. In complex projects, in companies, in a career, endless options can be a quiet form of poverty, scattering energy across too many paths. Lego's story is one of play and near poverty, but also of restraint used as a weapon. In a world obsessed with more features, more lines, more noise, their recovery hints at a darker competitive edge, the courage to do less, but do it so well that everyone drowning in more looks suddenly, painfully exposed. And that choice, to pull back instead of accelerate, set up Lego's next move, where the brick would stop being just a toy and start becoming an ecosystem. The brick became an ecosystem, but not because executives in suits suddenly discovered community in a PowerPoint. It happened because a small, relentless group refused to let Lego die quietly. There was a time when those people were seen as a curiosity, grown adults obsessing over children's toys. They had a name: AFOLs, adult fans of Lego. Let me take you back to the late 1990s and early 2000s. While Lego's leadership was chasing wild experiments, that AFOL community was watching the empire wobble in real time. They saw pieces multiplying, quality slipping, play patterns getting noisier and less pure. For a casual parent, the shelves still looked colorful. For a superfan who'd spent a life sorting bricks, the cracks were everywhere. And they said so. On forums, at conventions, in letters and emails, they warned that the system was losing its soul. Too many unique elements, too many one-off molds, too many sets that couldn't talk to each other. Because of their ruthless attention to detail and almost painful loyalty, they became an early warning system years before the balance sheet screamed for help. Then something unusual happened. Instead of dismissing them as nostalgic cranks, Lego finally took them seriously. Designers started visiting fan conventions, not as celebrities, but as students. Executives invited AFOLs into workshops, asked them to critique prototypes, even brought them into the design pipeline. Out of that humility came a quiet revolution: co-creation. Lego Ideas is the cleanest example. A platform where superfans pitch sets, rally votes, and, if chosen, see their idea turned into a real product with their name on the box and a share of the money. Not only did it generate hits like the Saturn V rocket and the Women of NASA set, it turned the most obsessive fans into partners. Their life with the brand stopped being passive consumption and became shared authorship. This is what real engagement looks like. Advisory councils of power users who get early access and bluntly tell the truth. Co-creation platforms that let the most devoted help build the future. Transparent communication when tough calls are made. Why themes are cut. Why prices move. Why certain risks are taken. It's an example of what happens when a company treats its fanatics as strategic assets instead of free marketing. Because the alternative is darker. Ignore superfans, mock their complaints, or quietly exploit their loyalty with lazy products and rising prices, and they do not simply vanish. They become historians of the decline, archiving every compromise, every shortcut, every betrayal of what made the brand great. Their criticism travels faster than any ad budget. His story is one of corporate near-death. Theirs is one of patient obsession. Together, they show a modern law. Either build with your community now, or watch them build something to replace you later. And Lego was about to discover what happens when that community doesn't just save the company, but starts demanding a share of the power. Lego's revival did not come from some dazzling new invention. It came from something far less glamorous and far more ruthless: subtraction. There was a time when the company tried to be everything at once: theme parks, clothing, media, wild experimental toys, and nearly lost its life in the process. So let me take you back to the early 2000s. Lego is losing close to $1 million a day. The empire looks impressive from the outside, with Legoland parks, sprawling product lines, robots, video games, even a clothing brand. But inside, the numbers are bleeding. Costs are exploding, shelves are chaotic, and no one can even say how many different bricks exist anymore. Growth had come from saying yes to everything. Survival was going to require saying no. The first big subtraction was brutal but simple. Sell the theme parks. Legoland had been a symbol of Lego's power, a physical kingdom of plastic bricks and family vacations. It was also devouring cash. By selling a majority stake to Merlin Entertainments, Lego cut away a glamorous distraction that produced a lot of headlines and very little profit. Less real estate, less operational risk, less debt. Suddenly, the toy company looked more like a toy company again. Next, they went after the bricks themselves. Between the mid-90s and 1998, the number of unique elements had nearly doubled. New colors, new molds, strange one-off pieces that worked in a single set, and then never again. Every extra element added cost, complexity, and confusion. Designers were told, "You are not designing toys, you're designing a system." Thousands of rarely used pieces were killed. The palette shrank. And paradoxically, creativity expanded because the remaining core elements had to carry the weight. Unprofitable lines followed, overly specialized themes, toys that didn't really connect to the brick system, expensive experiments that delighted focus groups but not actual sales reports, all cut. The company said no to unfocused expansions, no to chasing every trend, no to products that looked exciting in a boardroom but didn't reinforce the core idea of modular, rebuildable play. Each subtraction removed friction for factories, for retailers, and for families just trying to understand what Lego was. This runs directly against the normal corporate instinct. When sales fall, the reflex is to add more features, more versions, more marketing, more noise. It feels active. It feels like progress. But it's an example of what happens when fear dresses up as strategy. the core gets buried under a pile of well-intentioned clutter. So here is the pattern interrupt. What if growth does not mean doing more? What if the most powerful move in a project, a company, even a life, is a carefully chosen stop? Imagine auditing your own world the way Lego did. Which products, routines, or initiatives are your theme parks? Impressive, beloved, and quietly dragging you under. What would happen to your money, your time, your power to focus if those vanished? Lego's turnaround shows that subtraction is not absence, it is alignment. By cutting until only the strongest ideas remained, the company finally had a foundation solid enough to build on again, and the next moves would show just how massive that rebuilt empire could become. Lego's turnaround looks clean in hindsight, but under the surface it's an example of what happens when ambition and ego run ahead of responsibility. There was a time when the company didn't just want to make great toys. It wanted to reinvent play itself, dominate theme parks, video games, clothing, movies, and build an empire so visible that no child on Earth could miss it. Leaders chased every opportunity at once. New pieces exploded from a few thousand to nearly double that number in just a few years, each one a tiny declaration of creative genius and a quiet attack on the system that had made Lego powerful. Designers were encouraged to ignore the old brick grid, to sculpt, to bend, to make one-off parts that looked amazing on a slide deck and quietly wrecked the economics of the business. Because of that hunger to leave a personal mark, costs soared, complexity spiraled, and the company, for all its playful image, began burning money at a ruthless pace. Let me take you back to those late 1990s boardrooms. The dream was innovation. The reality was a brand drifting away from the very idea that had made it loved. When leaders confuse ambition with constant novelty, they don't just risk profits. They put identity on the line. For Lego, that meant moving from a simple, universal language of bricks to a noisy collage of disconnected experiments, each promising growth, all together pulling the company toward collapse. The rescue looked far less glamorous. Jürgen Vig Knudstorp did not arrive as a conquering hero, promising a new golden age of wild creativity. He showed up with spreadsheets, hard questions, and an almost boring message: protect the system. Say no. Cut themes. Sell Legoland. Tell designers, you are not designing toys, you are designing a system. In a world obsessed with visionary geniuses, the savior of this empire behaved more like a careful custodian, locking doors that had been left open too long. His story is one of ambition rerouted into discipline. Because of that shift, Lego rediscovered that responsibility can mean killing beautiful ideas. Licensed lines like Star Wars survived not because they were flashy, but because they worked inside the brick logic, reused elements, and respected the grid. Hundreds of other concepts quietly died on whiteboards and in prototypes so that the core could live. There is an ethical edge to all this. When a company becomes part of childhood, it stops dealing only in plastic and cash flows. It holds memories, rituals, and a strange kind of power over imagination. Brand stewardship turns into a moral role. The question is no longer just how much wealth can be extracted, but what kind of world is being built in the minds of the next generation. Most people will never run a global toy giant, but almost everyone is a steward of something: a team, a product, a family name, even a personal reputation online. Every time ambition whispers, more, faster, bigger, responsibility quietly asks, at what cost and to what? Lego's near death is a warning about what happens when that second voice is ignored. Because Lego survived, the story feels inspiring. At times inspiring and at times chilling, It shows how close beloved institutions can come to erasing themselves in the chase for growth. And as the company stepped back from the brink, the next chapter would prove that survival was only the beginning. The real test was whether it remembered what it was actually here to build. Lego survived by going back to the brick. But here's where the story turns and points directly at you, because collapse never announces itself with a siren. It creeps in the moment success, complexity, and distraction start pulling you away from the core that made you effective in the first place. That moment is your Lego moment. There was a time when Lego believed more was always better. More pieces, more themes, more wild experiments. Unique elements nearly doubled, costs exploded, and the company found itself losing around $1 million a day. That wasn't a random accident. It was the bill for drifting away from the system that had quietly powered the empire. Your life, your business, your creative work can follow the same arc, just on a smaller balance sheet. So let me take you back to the question Lego finally had to ask. What is your core brick? Not the glamorous project, not the impressive title, not the theme park version of your work, but the simple, repeatable action that actually creates value. For Lego, it was a tightly designed system of interlocking bricks, timeless play, and sets that could be rebuilt endlessly. For you, it might be writing daily, shipping one reliable product, or serving a specific group of customers better than anyone else. Then comes the uncomfortable sequel. Where have you added unnecessary elements? Lego had parts that appeared in a single set, strange molds that drove up costs without deepening play, ventures like theme parks that looked exciting but dragged attention away from the core toy business. In the same way, there may be meetings that exist only to protect egos, side projects that eat weekends without building real wealth, subscriptions, tools, or features nobody would truly miss if they vanished tomorrow. And which parts of your life are theme parks, flashy but off mission? A social feed that feels like work but never moves the numbers. A product line added to impress investors rather than customers. A creative habit that looks productive on camera but quietly drains energy from the work that actually matters. It's an example of what happens when the performance of progress replaces progress itself. Pick just one area where subtraction could prevent a future crisis. One product you could quietly retire. One workflow you could cut in half. One weekly ritual where you stop chasing new attention and instead re-engage deeply with your most loyal users, readers, or supporters and ask them what they actually value. Their answers might be far simpler and far more ruthless than the story you tell yourself. Start with a small experiment. Remove one offering for a month, collapse 3 steps into one, or spend a day watching real people use what you make, because the difference between collapse and comeback often begins with a single, uncomfortable decision: to face the numbers, to strip away the noise, and to tell yourself the truth. In the next chapter, that decision will lead Lego somewhere most companies never reach. In Lego's case, that decision to face the numbers came late, but it came. There was a time when this entire story was just a carpenter in a small Danish town, cutting wooden ducks in a shed, trying to keep his family out of poverty. From that workshop came the plastic brick system, a simple geometry of studs and tubes that locked together so cleanly it felt like a new language. Not just toys, but a grammar of play that could express houses, spaceships, empires. From there, the arc looks almost inevitable. The brick system spread, the company grew, and by the 1980s, Lego was living through a golden age. Modular towns, space fleets, castles with working drawbridges. Money poured in as children everywhere learned the same quiet ritual of pouring a box of bricks onto the floor. Then the world changed. Video games, cable TV, licensed characters, a new war for attention. Lego chased it all at once, adding new elements, new themes, new businesses, faster than its factories and balance sheet could absorb. Because ambition went unchecked, complexity exploded. Unique pieces nearly doubled in a few years, costs surged, and by 2003, Lego was losing around $1 million a day. It had theme parks, clothing lines, story-driven experiments, but the core economics were broken. This is what happens when a company confuses motion for progress and treats complexity as a trophy instead of a cost. Then came Jürgen Vig Knudstorp, a former consultant with a teacher's calm and a surgeon's ruthlessness. His story is one of subtraction rather than conquest. He sold off most of the theme parks, killed unprofitable lines, and told designers a sentence that, at times inspiring and at times chilling, would define the turnaround. You are not designing toys, you're designing a system. Data replaced ego. Reality replaced wishful thinking. The brick, not the brand vanity project, went back to the center. From that discipline, Lego's modern empire emerged. Licensed themes like Star Wars and Harry Potter were kept, but only when they served the system and made money. Adult fans were invited in, not as a marketing stunt, but as co-creators on platforms like Lego Ideas. Innovation kept going, but on a tight leash. New sets. Yes. Runaway piece counts and random side businesses. No. Leadership, in other words, finally looked like stewardship. So what does Lego really teach? Protect your core system. Let numbers insult your pride before the market does. Innovate with discipline, not panic. And understand that fear and ambition, when they run the show, can be just as dangerous as laziness. Because Lego didn't only save a company, it kept alive a creative language shared by millions of children and adults, a way to turn imagination into something you can hold. And that is where this stops being distant corporate drama. Let me take you back to your own life for a second. The projects you run, the habits you defend, the empire of obligations you've quietly built. The real question now is not what Lego did, but what you will choose to build, what you will dare to cut, and what you will finally decide is too important to abandon. So here is where Lego's story stops being a distant corporate drama and turns into a mirror. There was a time when the company was losing about $1 million a day, drowning in colors, pieces, theme parks, and side bets. It crawled back not with one miracle idea, but with a simple, ruthless playbook you can steal. Step 1. Identify your core brick. For Lego, the answer was not toys or theme parks or movies. It was a precise system. Plastic elements that lock together, can be reused forever, and let a child build any world. Your version is the one thing you do that actually creates real value, the thing people would miss if everything else vanished. Revenue helps reveal it, but so do emotions. Where do people light up, complain loudly, or keep coming back despite the chaos? Step 2. Audit your elements. Lego's leaders laid every product line on the table and discovered the number of unique pieces had nearly doubled in a few years. Costs exploded, complexity spiked, and the magic of the system was quietly eroding. Your elements are the projects, features, offers, habits, and promises that orbit your core brick. Write them down. All of them. That bloated product, that half-dead side hustle, that weekly meeting no one respects anymore. Step 3. Cut your theme parks. Lego literally sold off a majority stake in Legoland to raise cash and refocus. That is what happens when a company admits that prestige distractions are killing the empire. Your theme parks are the impressive but draining monuments you keep for ego, not impact. A showy partnership, a social channel that eats time and brings no money, a product that flatters the brand but quietly bleeds it. Some will have to go, not trimmed, cut. Step 4. Listen to your builders. LEGO turned to its most committed fans, from children doing playtests to adult super users designing sets, and discovered what actually felt like LEGO. His story is one of executives learning to shut up and watch how people played. Your builders are the customers, teammates, or loyal friends who live with the consequences of your decisions. Ask them what feels essential, what feels fake, and what they wish you would finally stop doing. Step 5. Design your system. LEGO stopped chasing random one-off hits and started building ecosystems. LEGO Star Wars, LEGO Harry Potter, LEGO Ideas, where fans submit sets that plug into the same brick language. It's an example of what happens when every new move strengthens the network instead of scattering attention. Your goal is the same. No more isolated projects. Each new effort should connect, reinforce, and make the next move cheaper, faster, or more powerful. Within the next 24 to 48 hours, choose one concrete move, a brutal audit, one honest conversation, a single cut, or a small redesign that makes two pieces of your life finally click together. It will feel uncomfortable. LEGO's turnaround was at times inspiring and at times chilling because it demanded honesty about what was actually working. Perfection was never required. Discipline was. If you have stayed with this story this long, the mindset is already there. The only question now is how far you're willing to go before a crisis forces your hand, and what kind of empire you want to say you built when the cutting is over. Because if a company like LEGO can almost vanish, anything can. Not only is it one of the most beloved toys on Earth, it is one of the most recognizable brands in history, woven into childhood, family traditions, and entire generations of imagination. And yet, there was a time when the world's favorite brick was just months away from running out of money. Let me take you back to that moment. This wasn't a forgotten factory in quiet decline. This was LEGO losing around $1 million a day, drowning in debt, with warehouses full of sets that children did not want, and retailers were quietly discounting. The empire looked strong from the outside. Theme parks, flashy robotics, wild new pieces in every color. On the inside, the numbers were at times inspiring and at times chilling because they told a simple truth. The more LEGO tried to be everything, the less profitable it became. It's an example of what happens when success turns into entitlement. When leaders start to believe the brand is too special to fail, complexity creeps in, pet projects multiply, and no one wants to be the person who says no. Between 1994 and 1998, the number of different LEGO elements nearly doubled. Every new curve, wing, and custom headpiece delighted designers, but each one quietly raised costs, slowed factories, and chipped away at the elegant system that had made LEGO powerful in the first place. The uncomfortable implication is this: if LEGO can drift that far from its core, so can a startup, a career, a YouTube channel, a personal reputation. No project is protected by how loved it used to be. The market does not care how magical the origin story felt, how much poverty it escaped, or how many childhoods it shaped. When reality and ego collide, reality wins. So LEGO's life becomes a living warning label. Check for creeping complexity, the extra product lines, features, meetings, and reports that no longer serve the mission. Watch for ego-driven projects, the initiatives that exist because someone powerful likes them, not because customers do. Notice the quiet erosion of what once made you effective, whether that was focus, speed, discipline, or the humility to measure what is actually working. Survival and greatness are not about never getting lost. They are about noticing when you have, and having the courage to turn back before the cliff. Lego did that by selling off theme parks to raise cash, cutting thousands of unprofitable elements, and returning to a simple idea: a system of bricks that could become anything as long as the company itself stayed within clear rules. So as this story closes, the real question is not what Lego did, but what mirrors it holds up for you. Where are you adding pieces that don't connect? Where are you betting on brand magic instead of hard numbers? In the next part, the invitation is simple. Keep exploring these stories and share how Lego's near collapse echoes the challenges inside your own world. So let's turn the mirror all the way around now, from Lego's boardroom back to your own life. There was a time when this company was losing almost $1 million a day, drowning in elements no one needed, convinced that more colors and more shapes would somehow buy it more time. It survived because someone finally asked the most brutal question of all. What is the one brick we refuse to lose? That is your challenge now. Identify your brick. Not 10, not a vague mission statement, not an entire fantasy empire on a whiteboard. One brick. The core skill, product, or value you want to protect and build around for the next decade. Maybe it is a way of thinking, a craft you have mastered, a customer you serve better than anyone else, or a standard you will not trade for money or applause. Write it down. Physically. On paper. In a notebook. On a sticky note that lives on your screen. Because once Lego named its brick, everything else became negotiable. Licensed themes, movies, parks, digital experiments, all of it had to serve the system of the brick or be cut. So here is the next move for you. In the comments or with your team, share one element you are willing to remove. One feature, habit, product line, meeting, or vanity project that does not connect to your brick. Say it out loud. Give it a name. Then name one system you want to start designing around that brick. A routine, a hiring rule, a product roadmap, a simple dashboard you will actually look at. Let me take you back to Lego's turning point for a second. Designers were told, you are not designing toys, you are designing a system. At times inspiring, and at times chilling. That sentence saved them. It forced discipline. It turned random creativity into repeatable wealth. Treat this channel the same way. Not as background noise, but as part of your system for judgment, a place you return to for stories of ambition, collapse, and turnaround that keep your own decisions slightly less delusional. Because his story is one of power and control, and Lego's story is one of near poverty and playful chaos, but they meet in the same place. What happens when focus disappears, and what it costs to get it back? It is an example of what happens when a brand believes its own myth for too long, and then has to rebuild, brick by brick, with the cameras still rolling. So if you want more of these stories, more scars behind the logos, treat subscribing as adding one more brick to a shared foundation. Like the video if it sharpened something for you. Share it with someone whose company or career feels wobbly, and help build a community that does not just admire iconic brands, but learns from their bruises and their balance sheets. Because Lego taught a quiet truth. Bricks do not come pre-assembled. Neither do great companies. Neither do great careers. They are built, rebuilt, and sometimes saved, one hard decision at a time.